Sunday, June 26th. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. There's a lot going on across the country and even the world, and some of the stuff that you're about to hear might be a big shockaroo to many of you. This is especially true in regards to what's going to be going on in Alaska this week. The city Hardy, Alaska, Hardey, is expected to have 3 consecutive days with high temperatures in the low 90s, Monday through Wednesday. There's only been 13 other times where the temperature has hit 90 degrees in that city, according to some sources, although it could be that that article was not written 100% accurately. So we have to look into that. Also, it's very difficult to find the source for all this, but the one exception is the National Weather Service. You'll have no issue finding the low 90s forecast with the National Weather Service. If you look up in these various computer models, if you can get access to them, you're not going to find it. So this is an area in southeast Alaska. But if you want to go into parts of Alaska where you will be able to find it, meaning you won't be able to find it for whatever reason in southeast Alaska, but it is forecasted to happen. The National Weather Service has high confidence in it, and that's what's happening in Alaska this week. 3 consecutive days with highs in the low 90s. At one point, there was talk of it being 4 consecutive days. But, you know, and the days are 18 hours long over there, so there's not much relief at night. If you look at the temperatures, they kind of, after they reach their peak, they kind of just stay there for many, many hours. You go up into northern Alaska, places Fairbanks, Alaska, temperatures going into the mid-80s this week for a couple days. You have high temperatures. This is a real mind-boggler. Going north of the Arctic Circle in northern Canada, there are places also where temperatures are going into the mid-80s this week. I think I even saw some upper 80s over there. This place is well north of the Arctic Circle. We also have phenomenal heat, nothing like last summer's heat, but developing. It's the first heat wave of the summer for the Pacific Northwest. European computer model shows sunny side Washington with a high of 106 degrees for tomorrow, today or tomorrow, but forecasters are forecasting heat, but not of that magnitude. The intensity won't quite be that high, but you go into Boise, Idaho, and it could be temperatures may approach 100 degrees there. That's on Monday. Billings, Montana gets hit with the heat for Tuesday. The Dakotas get hit with the heat for Wednesday. You go further east, and we have a one-day shocker for the Midwest as temperatures go into the upper 90s and even low hundreds for our area. If you go back to June 9th, let's take a trip back to June 9th. The podcast given June 9th, there was talk about how could a mainstream website be forecasting extreme heat very far in advance. The extreme heat they were forecasting was a 98-degree reading in St. Louis, Missouri for the very end of June. Now, I don't think it was June 30th at that time, but I did not specify the date. It could be. This is exactly what they were referring to. This is forecasted to happen right now. It's no longer a very long-term forecast. It's within the 7-day forecast cycle. It's forecast to happen on the final day of June. High temperatures in St. Louis, Missouri, going into the upper 90s. That's this Thursday. Temperatures going into the 90s, widespread 90s all over the Midwest. And if it's not in the 90s, temperatures are going to be in the hundreds. Another unique aspect to this heat, once again, is the lack of humidity. Probably due to the fact that the front, it's actually a strong front, according to many meteorologists. The Memphis, Tennessee National Weather Service is wording it as a weak front, but we'll have to talk about that later. But this, as of now, in terms of the temperature contrast for many locations, we're dealing with a stronger type of a front. St. Louis, Missouri is going to see for the first time temperatures drop below normal. Temperatures going into the 50s at night for St. Louis, Chicago, many locations. And then by the end of the week, by Thursday, we have high temperatures going back up into the 90s. This cooler air even moves all the way down into Mississippi, places like Louisiana. We have another day today of heat indices approaching 110 degrees. High temperatures yesterday across the Mississippi River Valley for the 4 main cities, the 4 big cities, New Orleans, Jackson, Memphis, Tennessee, and St. Louis, Missouri, ranged from, I believe, 99 to 102. It's possible in New Orleans it was just 107. Yep, I mean 97. Here's another big, unbelievable, this is just absolutely amazing. If we have background music, I think the background music's going to have to change for this. Northern Texas, Amarillo, Texas today, forecasted high 69 degrees. Temperatures in northern Texas today, in the Texas Panhandle, ranging from 67 to 72 degrees. Amazing stuff. This is really cool. Some say that these are temperatures in some of those locations are 30 degrees below normal. Thunderstorms with dust storms are taking place in Arizona. Most of the precipitation will be falling in the higher elevation areas, but some of it will be making it down into the Phoenix, Arizona area at times during the week. That's not going to put any type of a damper in the heat, however, as temperatures go well into the hundreds. High in the hundreds, dew points in the 50s. Salt Lake City having intense heat. Tomorrow, Los Angeles, Arizona. Los Angeles, California, going into the mid-90s for tomorrow. And we have heat advisories in effect for much of Oregon, Washington, some other areas around there for temperatures. Portland, Oregon, highs around 100 degrees today. Can you believe that? Highs around 100 degrees for Portland, Oregon today. The heat reaches its peak tomorrow for many of the places in the Northwest Pacific. The most deadly part of this heat advisory for the Pacific Northwest is something unique. You'll never hear about this in other places. It's called cold water shock, where each and every year the National Weather Service says people die from this. The water is very cold, and this is due to melting of the snowpack, which continues. The hotter it is, the quicker the snowpack melts, the higher the rivers get, but the colder the river gets. So it's also cold because it's the very beginning of the season. These are things you have to worry about also in Alaska. Here's another big one. The National Weather Service in Alaska says that the areas that are getting hit with the heat will even experience muggy conditions. Humid in Alaska. And I can't find the source for any of this. I checked the European computer model. I checked the GFS model, checked all of them. I can't find it, but they have it. They have high confidence. I don't know what muggy means because I can't find higher dew points, but so you have muggy. There's also a chance for thunderstorms in the area. These are places where people do not have any air conditioning. So this is pretty intense stuff for temperatures to be in the low 90s. Again, for Alaska, record heat was recorded in Japan yesterday as temperatures hit 104 degrees. We don't have much more about that. Heat finally made it to the East Coast again, especially the Northeast. High temperatures in many locations yesterday went into the low 90s. Highs today once again back into the low 90s. The front, and the Memphis, Tennessee National Weather Service could call it a weak front. Maybe for them it's a weak front, but this is actually a potent front responsible for bringing heavy rain tomorrow possible. Heavy rain possible for the Northeast. Severe storms are not as likely. The main risk will be the heavy rain with thunderstorms. There's always a potential for a severe storm. The Cincinnati, Ohio area also, parts of that location, especially areas south of Cincinnati and north of Cincinnati, we'll be seeing thunderstorms later on today. Actually, perhaps it's ongoing right now. Right now it's 4 o'clock over there. And it could very well be that there's thunderstorms now. I think the storms will... I noticed that the time of day where the instability is most intense is not the time of day when the chance for thunderstorms is highest. So that means that it's iffy whether the storms are going to end up being severe or not. But there certainly is a chance, and the main threat would be damaging winds. As we see with all of these storms right now, there's very little tornado talk right now. And damaging winds usually is also associated with large hail, but there's very little talk about the hail. And really those storms are blowing up. According to this morning's computer model, the storms would be blowing up about now. blowing up already from early afternoon, but getting more intense, covering most of Louisiana. I don't know if it's going on right now or not. As of earlier this morning, 11 o'clock this morning, between 11 and we already had 11:12 this morning. We had severe thunderstorm warnings issued for parts of Kentucky, southern Illinois, southern Indiana. Areas around there were receiving on and off severe storms. All of this pushes off to the East Coast for tomorrow. As we go through the afternoon, you actually could see the front very clearly on the precipitation, on a precipitation computer model. Whereas in the morning, you have to look more at the winds to find that front. Much cooler and drier air moves into the Midwest for this week. Again, but Thursday, Wednesday for places like in North Dakota, South Dakota, possibly Thursday as well. We're going to have temperatures hitting 104 degrees in some areas in the Dakotas for this upcoming Thursday. Water temperatures on Lake Michigan have hit 70 degrees. There are currently 70 degrees in some locations, but by Michigan City, the water temperature is only 52 degrees. 52 degrees, I believe that's Michigan City. But it's possible I'm mistaken on that. But there is one part of Lake Michigan which has a water temperature of 52, another part where it's 70. The Chicago area, it's mostly in the 60s. Water temperature of 60 degrees and up is the official or unofficial reading that's necessary to declare that the cold season has come to an end and we don't have to worry about any more cold wind coming off the lake for the Chicago area. That happens usually in mid-June, and here we are, it's late June, it's already well into the 60s. Moving right along, let's go into the Florida area. Now, one thing over here, the Hurricane Center in Miami has issued a tropical storm warning for an area that's very hard to find in the U.S. It's really out in the Pacific Ocean, and that's why it's hard to find. But you know, this has been unusually common, it feels like, for this year. There's been numerous hurricane warnings, tropical storm warnings, and it's specifically for that area. The monsoon moisture continues to push into the desert Southwest, but the state of New Mexico is the area that's getting hit with this the hardest. And by the end of the week, things are expected to dry out, especially for Arizona. Today will be the final day of very intense heat for many places, like in Oklahoma. The final day, it's only the second day, but it's the final day of 90-degree heat for places in the Northeast. Very humid conditions, though, may develop midweek this week in the Northeast, but temperatures just won't be that high. Here in the Chicago area, the National Weather Service informs us that the best chance for thunderstorms this week will be Tuesday late and then on Thursday as well. Thursday probably later in the day in response to the heat. Although there won't be humidity, at least by Midwest standards, this will not be a humid heat, but dew points will likely make it into the low 60s. Which in other places could be considered humid. This segment has been added on. This is an add-on to what was previously said. Today's date is actually a couple days after when Sunday's podcast was said. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. On Sunday, we mentioned, and it's the beginning of this podcast, we mentioned that there was a city in Alaska where the National Weather Service was forecasting highs to go into the low 90s, and that information is readily available on the National Weather Service website. I don't have an update as to whether the city did go into the low 90s, but here's something that I think is important to point out because I came across it right after I gave the podcast. I found a city in northern Alaska, as you can see on the imagery to this particular podcast, Fort Yukon, Alaska, as of Sunday, the European computer model was forecasting 3 days this weekend going into the low 90s. Now realize the Arctic Circle, this city is basically right along the Arctic Circle. It seems like it's a little bit north. I always thought that the Arctic Circle was 66.5 degrees, but it seems like on Wikipedia it said 66.3, I believe. Fort Yukon is 66.33, and this Arctic Circle is 66.30. So this is in the Arctic Circle. We have temperatures going into the low 90s. On the imagery for this podcast, if you're able to see it, I did point out the various amounts of solar insolation that the area receives, not on July 2nd, which is the day that we're speaking about all this heat, but rather for June 21st. The reason why I chose June 21st or June 20th, actually in some years, such as 2012, it was June 19th. The reason I chose that day is because that's when solar insolation is the highest. Also, it takes a while before the atmosphere responds to the heat. So in a certain way, whatever the solar insolation was, whatever the area was receiving highest solar insolation on June 19th, that's the area that you could argue will be the warmest for some time, or could be the warmest, or at least if it is the warmest, you have a defense. Without coming on to climate change, there is a defense for these places. Up the North Pole, it's up at 526, whatever it says on that image. And, here in Chicago, I believe it's 486. In St. Louis, I believe it's 485. And then, you go in, the lowest it gets, I think you get down to 440. The further north you go, once you get past 44 degrees north latitude, the numbers actually start to go down. If you look at the image, you wouldn't pick that up because it says Honolulu, Hawaii is somewhere down, I don't know, it says 460 perhaps. And then it seems like the further north you go, the more solar insolation there is. Now, the reason why that would be is because the days are getting longer. But it really, the further north you go, the more solar insolation there is, up to about 44 degrees north latitude. As you go north of 44 degrees north latitude, the solar insolation gradually starts to go down to somewhere in the 60s latitude, and then it starts to go up again. What that means is that because the sun is weaker, the sun is not as direct as you go north, so really the solar insolation should be less. But the days get longer, so that not only makes up for the fact that the sun is weaker, that even gives cities more solar insolation than areas which are receiving direct sunlight. But for some reason, when you get north of 44 degrees north latitude, that's no longer true. The length of the day no longer makes up for the weakness of the sun, or at least the lower sun angle. For some reason, that lower sun angle has more of an impact when you get north of 44 degrees north latitude. But when you get up to somewhere in the 60s, when the days start to get to 20 hours long, and especially when you get north of the Arctic Circle, when you have days of 24 hours long, so those type of days, that does override any type of lower sun angle that they're receiving, and they actually get the highest solar insolation in the northern hemisphere and actually the world during that time, especially the North Pole. Very high solar insolation remains there for 60 days. Very high, top category stuff. Even though it rapidly declines at the North Pole. At the North Pole, it rapidly declines, but it still remains at 460s by July 21st, and it continues to rapidly decline to levels which are no longer tropical, but it takes another month before it reaches that level. So we have quite some time. Now, but the main point of this added segment is just to say two things. One of them I already said. I happen to also explain the image, okay? That might be important, the image that I used for the podcast. the fact that I found a city with using the European computer model, Hardy, Alaska. That's the name of the city. Whatever the city was that I said in the beginning of the podcast on Sunday, I believe it's Hardy. Hyder. Maybe it's Hyder. Okay, whatever that city is, I was able to find the European computer model forecasting mid-80s. But the National Weather Service's forecast of low 90s is something that I couldn't find. But it would be interesting to see what actually ended up happening. What I did find, however, is I did find another area, as just pointed out, of 3 consecutive days in the 90s. It just wasn't the city that they said, and this area happens to be in the Arctic. It's Fort Yukon, and I have not checked if that is still in the forecast. The second point is that I mentioned on Sunday, earlier in this podcast, that I wasn't able to find higher dew points anywhere in Alaska, but yet the National Weather Service was saying not only is there going to be heat, but there's going to be warmth. It's going to be mugginess. The heat will come with mugginess. So I couldn't tell you what type of dew points we're dealing with. But afterwards, I did find the European computer model was forecasting certain areas in southeast Alaska to have dew points in the lower and mid 60s. It's just that those dew points were not forecasted to happen at the same time that temperatures would be in the low 90s, but it would be the same day. So there would be some level of mugginess occurring later in the day. It's just amazing to have dew points in the 60s in parts of Alaska. It would be interesting to see what actually happened, and one could easily look it up at this point. Thank you for listening. I wish everyone a wonderful day.